Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I would like to just introduce the module today. Module A's overall theme is centering on community, family, and ourselves. This is our first module, and we want to open in a good way. And for this module, we're going to have a moment of silence. Other ways that we can start in a good way for uh, beginning of these modules, we can start with a prayer or have some opening remarks. But I invite you all to share a moment of silence as we begin this module. So we're just going to take a few seconds and we'll start now. Thank you all. We like to start in a good way to ground ourselves before we begin these modules. We're going to be going over the learning agreements and parking lot shortly. If you have any questions throughout this training, please feel free to let me know. I am here to support you all during this process of learning together. I also want to draw your attention to your workbooks that each of you have and will be following along with the slides throughout this training. This is a great place to write down notes, and it's also where we'll be doing some activities. And so uh, we'll be referring to these workbooks for each modules throughout the week. The first activity here is centering ourselves in community. It's in your workbook on page A3. I want to take some time to do some introductions, and we have some prompts here on the slide, and we're just going to go through them with all of you. And please feel free to introduce yourself and who you are, and what are you most curious about or hope to learn from this training today, and why? And if you would like to take notes, there is a space on page A3 in your workbook where you can take notes while others are introducing themselves. And so I'm going to hand it over to Hardy first to introduce herself. Hardy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Hardy. I use the he, him pronouns. I am from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have a 4-year-old boy, and I'm really, really excited to learn how to become a better parent for him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hardy. Veronica?
Hi everyone, I'm Veronica and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm from the Navajo Reservation here in New Mexico. And what I'm curious about learning from this training is, I guess, I have 7 kids and they kind of all range in age from 1 years old until, adult children. So I'm just curious how this training will apply to my role as a parent just across those different ages. And also, I've been a part of other trainings before that have to do with historical trauma. So I'm just curious what's similar or different with this training.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you for sharing. Teresa, would you like to go next?
Yes, good. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you. My name is Teresa, and I will be one of the facilitators alongside Rebecca for this module. I am from the Pueblo of Isleta, which is here in New Mexico, and again, just really excited to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Teresa. And we have Suzanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne. I live in the Santa Fe area. I'm also a mom to a couple of boys who are both in their teens. And I'm really excited about this training because there are things that my parents did that I really loved, and there are things that they did that I want to parent differently. And I'm hoping that I can learn more about how I can do that when it feels like some things just feel automatic for myself or for my community to do things a certain way. And I just want to learn more about how maybe I can change things in my parenting. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for sharing a little bit of yourselves and why you're here. It's really great to learn all the reasons why we come together, especially around parenting and our community. My name is Rebecca, and I'll be your facilitator alongside Teresa, and it's really great to meet you all. So we're going to take a moment here to to learn a little bit about what a safe versus brave space is for this training. And here on the slide, we've shared a definition. And I'm going to read out loud the definition so that we can learn together what we mean by safe versus brave space. Here, a safe space is ideally one where there is not judgment based on identity or experience, where the expression of both can exist and be affirmed without fear of repercussion and without pressure to educate. While learning may occur in these spaces, the ultimate goal is to provide support. A brave space encourages dialogue, recognizing difference and holding each person accountable to do the work of sharing experiences and coming to new understandings, a fear that's often hard and typically uncomfortable. So I want to ask all of you to think about a time where you might have been in both a supported and challenged space, maybe where you were both teaching and learning. What does it take to create a space like this? And I welcome you all to unmute yourself and to share your thoughts. Suzanne.
In spaces that I feel safe to both like teach and learn from the group, it's if people commit to trying to assume positive intention, that it might not come out perfectly, but that we can all participate from where we're at, and that we commit to not sharing personal stories outside of the space without that person's permission.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? What does it take to create a safe space or a brave space like this? Hardy.
I think making sure that everyone feels heard and also have the space to talk and taking turns, maybe.
Those are really great examples. Thank you. Anyone else? Veronica.
I would say maybe not feeling forced to participate. I think sometimes I like to listen and process things first before I speak. And so I really feel comfortable when people give me that time to do that before I'm expected to join in the group.
Great. Thank you. That's another great example. Yeah, those are all really great reflections on safe versus brave spaces. Some other things to consider is speak from your own experience instead of generalizing, meaning using I statements instead of they, we, or you. Another example can be asking questions with curiosity and respect, and participating to the fullest of our ability, right? The goal of inclusion of every voice, and that the goal is not to agree, it is to gain a deeper understanding. So another example that I would like to share is just be conscious of your body language and nonverbal communication. These are all really great cues that we can use and strategies that we can use to create safe and brave spaces for each other. So now we're going to review the learning agreement for these modules that we're going to be going through. And every time we can add to this list. But we want to highlight a few items here. And I want to ask if you feel comfortable moving forward with this list. This agreement is just to inform the group that this will guide our module today and all future sessions. And at the beginning of each of these modules, we'll have a chance to review them and make any edits or additions. And the other thing I would just like to highlight is that when reviewing the last dot point, challenge by choice, your safety is more important than your participation, and that this curriculum is very interactive and that there are many opportunities to participate or volunteer, engage, or being part of brave spaces. So please center your own safety when dealing how and when to engage throughout the training, and learn and lean into self-care as needed. As a facilitation team, Teresa and I, we're here to support you as well if you need it. So what are some ways that we can practice self-care with throughout the training today? Is there any examples that people have or you're thinking of? Hardy.
Maybe taking a water break or taking a bathroom break if you need to.
Great. Any other examples? Veronica.
Maybe standing up if, sitting down is, there's a lot of sitting down time. Sometimes it's helpful to stand up and kind of move your body a little bit. And then maybe just step outside if there's something that comes up where you're feeling upset or you have some uncomfortable feelings and just need a moment to kind of recenter yourself and get a little bit of privacy.
Excellent. Yes, those are two great examples: hydrating, movement, taking a break, breathing techniques, stretching, mindfulness, and even prayer can be all great strategies throughout this module and the future modules as well. So please take time to do the self-care that's needed. And we'll end our session today and each session with reminders about self-care because it is so important to our role as parents and caregivers. And we'll have a session even dedicated to self-care in Module D. All right, so how's everybody feeling about the learning agreement list so far? Great, I see some head nods. And has anyone ever been to a training where they've had a parking lot? No, see some head nods. Okay, yes, no's. What do you think it's used for? And maybe think of, a parking lot where it's a space, and if you see on the slide, there's a little arrow pointing to that. What do you think that's for? Suzanne.
It's how we've done it in trainings before that I've been to. I've heard parking lot used for if we run out of time to come back to a conversation, or if there's something that's off topic that we might cover a little bit later, to put it somewhere so we don't forget, and that way we can move on.
Great. Awesome. Yes. Just to place together ideas or questions that you have and any topics that maybe are a little off topic, but we don't want to lose them completely. So we just put them in a space. We park them there. And if time permits, these will be covered later in the course and through follow-up after the course, or we'll refer them back in a future session. So we'll take note of those and we'll be sure to hold them there. So in today's training, there may be opportunities for discussion And in order to end on time, I'll facilitate the timing and move the training along as needed. We also want to take a moment to just mention exit tickets and what they are. And at the end of each session, all of you will complete this exit ticket as a way to check in on the learning and the learning environment. So at the end of the training, we'll also use the new ideas or anything that comes up to also add to our learning agreement as well. But I want to highlight a few things on this exit ticket and answer any questions that you might have. So on this exit ticket overall, there's going to be a reaction to the class using this emoji scale. And this is a place where you can rate the class or the session with the emoji that you prefer. And then you also want to, we're going to ask that you share a little bit of what you learned, maybe something new or something you want to learn more about. And if you have any questions you still have from the end of today's session, we want you to put that here as well. And the last question on this card asks if follow-up is needed. Please indicate for what kind of support on the back and think about what can be shared as other ideas or feedback on the session. So I'll review these cards immediately again once more after the session if you have any questions. Okay, so we're going to jump in here to the curriculum overview. And if this is the first time you're seeing this image on the slide, it is titled Return to the Sacred Path. And this can also be found in your workbooks on page III, A4. So if you want to turn to that page now, you can do so. And this outlines our process for confronting historical trauma and embracing our history, understanding trauma, releasing the pain, and transcending the trauma. And we'll revisit this image throughout your trainings together. Think about this image as our roadmap for our work ahead. And in order to make our way through this image, we'll be navigating through the following modules. I'm going to highlight those here. Module A is centering on community, family, and ourselves, which we'll be doing today. Module B is understanding stress in relation to our bodies and minds. Module C, understanding trauma and parenting. Module D is understanding parenting, self-care, and support. And then we're going to shift into Module E, planning for the future and talking about a parenting action plan. And there's part 1 and part 2 is in Module F. Module G is building our skills through play, and Module H will close through raising resilient children. So if there's any information regarding the scheduling of these sessions, we'll be sure to update you throughout this time together. So we're going to take this next moment to view a video called the Lakota Laws. It's about 5 minutes. And there's a section in your workbook on page A4 where you can take notes. This video informs how the curriculum was developed and provides some context as we start Module A. And we'll be listening to the audio vignette to learn about the 7 Lakota laws or values and how they relate to parenting. Next in the video, you're going to hear from Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, University of New Mexico, and Dr. Josephine Chase, who's at Oglala Lakota College, as they share about the Lakota laws. And as you listen to them explain these Lakota laws, write down any concepts or ideas that resonate with your family or parenting experience on page A4 of your workbooks.
the 7 laws are things that are people respect, and sometimes there's diversity, but they are Wachante Oganake is generosity. Wowawunshila is compassion. Wowahunia is respect for all of creation. Wowachin Tanka is to have a great mind. Wowachwala is humility, state of silence, being humble, and no one is above another. And Wohitika is courage, bravery, principled, and being disciplined. And Woksape is wisdom and understanding.
The 7 laws, from my understanding, are laws that our people were given to live by. Some people call them values or virtues, but they're related, I think, to values and virtues. But these are laws that we are to abide by in order to live a virtuous and wholesome life. So and I think other indigenous peoples or native tribes have similar values or laws to abide by, and they may vary, but I think they may be similar as well. So Wachante Obanake is generosity that we share with all of our relatives, whether it be knowledge or material goods or just helping people along in life. Wawa Ushila is compassion, and that helps us to relate to others that we're not above others or we don't know more. And if people make mistakes, that's human nature, and that we can't always judge or criticize. Wawa Uniha is respect for all creation. No one is above the other, and we as humans are equal in all of creation. We're not above the animal nation or the plants, or the earth. So we have respect for all life. Wawa Chitanka is to have a great mind, to observe, to learn from others, from nature, and to basically have good thoughts and to think before we take action. Wowachwala is humility, to have silence, to listen, and again, not to be kind of a know-it-all or think that our way of thinking or doing is better than others. Wo uhitike, to have courage, bravery, to have self-discipline, to have principles in the way that we approach life. And Woksape is to have wisdom and to have understanding. And that's a thing that we continue to develop throughout our lives, no matter how old we get, that, there's still room to learn and to grow. And I think also it provides helping for us to understand sometimes why we need to have rules, to have structure, to set boundaries, and to explain to children also why they need, some boundaries, and that, in order to protect them and to offer support or direction. So, it kind of keeps us as parents in a frame of mind of, what our responsibility is, as well as helping children to understand why we have to make certain decisions and structure for them. They offer guidance.
Okay, so at this time, we're going to take a moment to reflect on what stood out for you or resonated with you when you were listening to the video. And I welcome you all to unmute yourself and share some thoughts. Hardy.
Yeah, that was such a good video. I really like it. I think I resonate with it a lot because it feels like those are a lot of the values are very similar to what I grew up with in my community. For example, the video they talk about the value of prayer and respect, which I can see in the book. Yeah, so those are certain values that have been really ingrained as I grew up, which I also then passed down to my son, or try to pass them.
Thank you. That's a really great example, Hardy. And another question I wanted to ask, which one of these values impact your parenting? Which one stood out for you? Suzanne.
One that is really important to me that I feel like I'm always striving for is the value of compassion and trying to not only have compassion for my sons, but also for myself in the parenting journey, that it's my first time too.
Right. Thank you for that really great example. What's great about this video is that it shows how there are these just common values that we all share, no matter really where we're from or some of the things that we might share across generations. And so thank you all for sharing that. We're going to move on now to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to my co-facilitator, Teresa, to take us through the next set of slides.
Okay, today we're going to go over the learning objectives for Module A, and you can find those learning objectives on page A2 of your workbook. So let's go ahead and review, first of all, the Module A, the overview of the module, and it is centering on community, family, and ourselves. And the overview, the goal of this module is to create a community of learning, begin how to understand traditional and community values, how they influence parenting, and be introduced to a definition and impacts of historical trauma on parenting. The learning objectives for Module A include identify traditional values that inform parenting, define historical trauma impacts to tribal communities, and identify ways that historical trauma has interrupted traditional parenting practices. So that's this is what we'll be focusing on today. And I want to move into the next slide, into the centering ourselves activity. And I want to also point you to page A5 in your participant workbook. And I'm going to read some statements for you to consider. And so we'll get into an activity in just a moment. This parenting training you are about to begin is the start, or maybe the continuation of an ongoing journey towards understanding how trauma has impacted Native parenting over the generations. Each module that you'll complete contains valuable information, space for open discussions, and opportunities to individually reflect on your own parenting experience. In this training, you will hear words and see images that relate to trauma, interruption, disruption, and other instances that could bring difficult emotions to the surface. So in this training, you will also hear and see words related to resilience, reclaiming, and support, which can offer hope when learning about trauma. Your well-being is important, and it's important to take care of yourselves throughout the course of this training. Trauma refers to an event or series of events that cause significant harm, whether physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. Each person's reaction to trauma is unique, and the way we respond can vary widely. These trauma responses can manifest in both positive and negative ways. In this set of modules, you will learn what historical trauma is and why it's important for us as Native people to understand. The activities in each module are not meant to point blame or cause shame, but rather to challenge our thinking beyond what we know now and ask ourselves, what changes do I want to make? How do I begin to make these changes? What kind of supports do I need in order to be successful as a parent? How can I make changes for our next generation? Our understanding of trauma and historical trauma as Native parents is important because it also sets each of us on a path toward healing. We will better understand how trauma affects us and our communities. We'll be better equipped to know how to support each other and change things so they become better. In later modules, you will learn how Native people have overcome trauma and how we are continuing to do so in the present day. We have come to learn through this work and information you will receive that healing from historical trauma takes time. As a participant in this training, you will become part of a growing movement with other Native caregivers who wish to understand and learn so that future generations can grow to be healthier and happier. We deeply thank you for your time and commitment and for taking on this journey with us as we transcend our collective historical trauma together. So we will begin this journey together, and we are going to be doing an activity titled Centering Ourselves and Belonging. And the activity will take approximately 10 to 15 minutes with at least some time to reflect and share what we've come up with. You can turn to page A6 of your participant workbook to follow along with this activity. We will be spending time reflecting on our own and as a group about belonging and community. So please use the questions that are on A6 and jot down your ideas in your workbooks. Has everybody had a chance to get to page A6 in your workbooks? Okay, let's keep moving. Again, afterwards, there will be an opportunity for you to share anything that you feel comfortable sharing. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, thank you for following along with the messaging from your workbook, page A5. We're going to go ahead and move into an activity, and this activity can be found on page A6 of your participant workbook. The activity is called Centering Ourselves in Belonging. And I'm going to ask you to turn to page A6 as we start thinking about what does it mean to belong. We are going to have about 15 minutes total to share for this activity. And we are also going to have an opportunity to work in small groups, but also be able to share out with the larger group. So I want you to turn to page A6 and consider these questions. First, how do our tribal communities create belonging? Another question to consider is, what does it mean to belong? And then finally, how has belonging in tribal communities changed over time? So I want you to get into small groups and discuss these questions amongst yourselves. And I'll give you about 10 minutes to do that. Once you finish with that, then we'll come back to the larger group and share out. Okay, thank you. I hope you all had good discussions in your small groups. We're going to go ahead and take this opportunity now to do a little bit of a debrief and report out what some of the answers came up in your small groups. So I'm going to start with, how do our tribal communities create belonging, and what does it mean to belong? Is there anyone that would like to offer what came up in your small groups? Yes, Hardy.
Thank you so much. Yeah, our group has such a wonderful discussion, and we have a lot of common answers in our small group. So for the first question, we kind of discuss how all of our communities, there are a lot of community events that are happening, and a lot of our community, talking about like our family, we also have a lot of family gathering and family events. So it kind of leads to then our like second question in this workbook. We were kind of thinking about like, what does it really mean then to belong? I think because of all of the events, it kind of feels like, it's like about like being invited to these events and being around our loved ones and the people in our community. And then, not only just being invited, we're also actively, cooking or like bringing something, or like almost like, contributing to those events. I think that's what makes it, like mean to belong in our community. We're contributing to the community.
Thank you, Hardy. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to move into the last question, and that is, how has belonging in our tribal communities changed over time? Suzanne.
Our group had such a robust discussion about this that it's changed so much. And one of the things that came up a lot from many different participants was that for many people living away from the community where events are taking place, it means now having to travel to show up to events, not being there. And so connection and community and belonging has changed over time, that we have to drive distances, and sometimes that means going outside of the community, and sometimes that means bringing people into the community to come back home.
Thank you. And absolutely, we know that there are different ways to either feel like you belong, or else to have other people feel part of the group and part of the activities. But we also know distance and travel and transportation can be a little bit challenging, but we can overcome those challenges when we all come together. Thank you, Suzanne and Hardy, for sharing. So learning about how we ground ourselves in belonging to community and how belonging connects us to our values is part of what makes us Native peoples and influences the values we believe in. In future sessions, we will revisit community when discussing circles of support and parenting action plans. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Rebecca for the next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everyone. This next section is called Community Values, and I'm going to ask everyone to focus on a page in their workbook. That's page A6. And this is going to be a discussion on community values or family values. I just want to remind everyone about the video we watched earlier. on the 7 Lakota laws. And I'm going to ask you all to share with your elbow partner one important value that was passed down to them from the community from which you belong. And write any reactions or ideas on page A6, and we'll take a moment to do that. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, great. Okay, everyone, we're going to come back together. And as you can see, there are pieces of chart paper around the room, and they have titles and labels on them, community values. And we want you to all to share on these chart papers the ideas that you came up with. And in a little bit, we're going to go around the room and we're going to share what's on our individual chart papers. And so we're going to give everybody some time to do that, and we'll come back together in a moment. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in that activity. It was really great to see everyone's chart paper, and I saw some similar themes. I saw a lot of making time to be with relatives. I saw attending community events, carry on traditions. And so thank you all for sharing those really amazing examples. Wanted to just highlight that the values that we're talking about not only exist in our communities, but they also influence each of us and the way we parent. And so we're going to move on to the next discussion here. So this next discussion, and you can find a page in your workbook to jot down any notes. It's on page A6. And the discussion question here is, which of these values impact our parenting? And I invite you all to share your thoughts on this. And so please, you can raise your hand and share whenever you like. Hardy.
Yes, I think one of the values that I see in a lot of the chart papers are kind of making time for each other. So I think, translating that to my son, right, I think it's important that I make time to be able to kind of spend quality time with my son that's kind of unbroken, and spending time, teaching him about our family kind of like traditions that have been passed down to me by my parents back to them. Just making sure that those are, there, even if I'm busy, and, really trying hard to make time for that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Artie. That was a really great example. We're going to move on now to the next slide. This next activity, we're going to talk a little bit about the roles in raising a child. And you can find this page in your workbook on A7. This activity is centering on family. We talked a little bit about what are our common values. So we're going to focus now on roles in raising a child. And this discussion, we have some prompts in your workbook, and you'll be working in small groups for a few minutes. And what we're going to ask you all to do is to come up with examples, as many examples as you can. And in your workbook on page A7, each small group will be writing or drawing the different roles involved in raising a child. So I want to ask you all to consider both traditional roles and current day roles. For example, you might include parenting roles, grandparenting roles, even include aunts or uncles, cousins, other community members that you can think of. And when everyone is finished, each group will report out to the large group and will identify a person or people to do the reporting out, if you can identify somebody in your group. And so once this time is up, we'll go around the room and each of the group report out for about 2 minutes. Okay, so we'll give everyone some time, come up with as many examples that you can think of roles in raising a child. Okay, everyone, we're going to come back together, and I saw a lot of great examples on people's chart papers. So I'm going to ask if somebody can report out from each group and share a few thoughts. So who would like to go first? Suzanne.
In our group, what we jotted down was there are informal roles and there were formal roles. And so there were some that have been done a lot in community as to, I heard examples in our group of who can give advisement and who are some of those traditional roles within the community that we go to get support. We also talked about depending on the roles that people have. And so there was an example in our group of a pastor who is a part of a family. And so spiritual advisement look different in one family versus another family. And we talked about not only the importance of the adults in the lives of young people having a role, but also that the young people also have a role to contribute to the family as well. And so we spent a lot of time looking at both of those kind of what are the adults around the young people in our different family structures, and also the roles of young people and how it looked different depending on families.
Those are great examples. I really like how you included even outside of our immediate family, like you said, maybe that's a community member, a religious leader, spiritual leader. They also have roles that are really important as well. Thank you for sharing that. Who would like to go next? Hardy.
Yeah, I was thinking about the role of cousins. It's very interesting that, it makes me think a little bit more about like, oh, how do cousins help raising a child? I was looking back at my own childhood. I think, my parents' siblings, their kids, so my cousins, we tend to be like play partners, right? Like we were also close to each other. We were just neighbors. So traditionally, like it's like a pastime thing, they can be mentors as well. But now, current day, right, a lot of my cousins live outside of the community. So, thinking about, like the previous, like activities that we have done. Oh, yeah, nowadays, like a lot of people are now living kind of further away. So now the way that we connect is more like through like, things like FaceTime or video calls. So it's a little bit different than just like being there and, just like playing together in person. But now I see like, my kids are talking more to their cousins, like via like, video games or something like that, which is very interesting how that has evolved over time.
That's a really great example and a nice personal reflection that you shared with us from your group about the role of cousins and how that's changed over time and how we connect even. So those are really great examples. Thank you all for sharing. Now we're going to go into a break. If you can go to the next slide, please. We're going to take about a 15-minute break and we'll provide you the time to return back to the group. So encourage you all to do what you need to do to take care of yourselves in that time, and we'll see you in a little bit.
All right. How's everyone feeling? I hope you had an opportunity to do some self-care during the break. I know we've covered quite a bit earlier in this session, and I just want to make sure to remind everyone to please do take care of yourself during these next few slides. We are going to be talking about historical trauma and some unresolved grief. We'll be talking about boarding school experiences and the timeline of what we are calling imposition. So there will be some materials here that we'll be reviewing. And again, just want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself during the entire module, but in particular, these next few slides. We've been talking a lot about belonging and how our communities come together and how we can identify that we're belonging to whatever may be happening at the time. So I want to move us into the timeline of impositions. And I also want you to turn to page 8, A8 in your workbook. And you can follow along there. And again, if you need to get some water or anything like that, please do so. Take care of yourself. So according to Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, historical trauma is the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. In returning to the sacred path, confronting this historical trauma and unresolved grief is key to move into healing. This process means recognizing and understanding the profound impact of past events, especially those shaped by policies and practices that were directed at tribal communities and caused generational harm. By acknowledging these traumas, we, along with our families and communities, can begin the journey toward collective healing. We will be discussing a timeline of collective traumas. And again, please feel free to refer to page 8, A8 in your workbooks so you can follow along. So prior to 1492, tribal societies throughout North and South American continents and surrounding island nations were flourishing. Our origin or creation stories root us in these lands. We had our own community structures, family structures, languages, religion, ceremonies, and traditions. We had trade routes and our own science and medicine, for example. However, with the onset of colonization, traumatic events specifically targeted Native peoples with the intent to assimilate us, strip away our identity, subjugate us, control or oppress, and in some cases, eradicate us, destroy or exterminate. Historically, traumatic events include massacres, forced relocation, forced removal from traditional homelands, forced removal and separation of children from parents, community, and land, and unconsented medical experimentation. These are not singular events, but rather a series of targeted traumatic events over generations. They are experienced as collective traumas, and in many cases, the aftermath can unknowingly impact generations, affecting our mental, social, physical, and spiritual bodies. Research is beginning to provide evidence that we can pass stress due to trauma to the next generation by changes in the genes of our DNA. This is called intergenerational transmission. Even traumas that happened long ago in history can be experienced again and again in each subsequent generation. The history of colonization with its subsequent impositions and trauma over generations has impacted parenting practices over the course of time. And I do want to give credit where credit is due, and this timeline of impositions model was adapted from Resilience of Culture and Indigenous Heritage by Regis Pecos, who is a former governor of Cochiti Pueblo. And we can provide the link to the Resilience of Culture and Indigenous Education once we conclude. I'd like to transition into the next slide, and please follow along again on page. So now we're going to talk about boarding school experiences. And again, please follow along on page A9 in your participant workbook. This activity, we will be reflecting on boarding school experience. So I'm asking you to please write down examples of how boarding school experiences have impacted you personally, your family members, and others in your community. And again, you can use page A9 in your workbook to do this activity. So go ahead and take a moment. All right, thank you. And I wanted to reflect on some of the things that I was hearing and seeing that people were writing down in their notebooks. And some included fun experiences with friends, team sports, and things like that. Others included, I was missing my family and not feeling connected to my community. So there were different responses that people were writing down in their notebooks. So, and thank you for that. Thank you for all of that. So we do have varied responses to the impact of boarding schools, and we want to acknowledge and recognize that. Boarding schools really are an example of these impositions and experiences that targeted our population. The boarding school era, driven by U.S. policy, was one of the most far-reaching events and actions in American Indian and Alaska Native history. And it's really important to note that by 1923, 83% of all American Indian Alaska Native youth were in residential schools. And at that time, the majority of those children were taken involuntarily to these schools and away from their families and communities, and often traumatic event itself. While these experiences of boarding school have changed over time, the original intent was to take children away from their tribal communities, from their families, and from their identities. And after exploring the topic of boarding schools, it's important to continue to examine trauma, a key consequence that's often associated with such experiences. Because understanding trauma asks us to consider the ways people process and respond to these experiences, which again can vary greatly. So now let's discuss some of the common responses to trauma and how people cope with the effects. We're still on page A9 in your participant workbook, where you can continue to follow along. So trauma experiences can cause enormous stress physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Historical traumas like the ones experienced by Native peoples have much the same impact. Historical traumas like the ones experienced by Native peoples have much the same impact. We will go deeper into the impacts of trauma in the next module, in Module B. So according to a study on the impacts of historical trauma, for those who responded, 36% had daily thoughts about loss of tradition in their communities. 34% experienced daily thoughts about the loss of culture, while 24% reported feeling angry regarding historical losses. 46% had daily thoughts about alcohol dependency and its impact on their community. 35% were distrustful of the intentions of the dominant white culture due to historical losses the Native American people suffered. We took this information from a study by Whitbeck and others, which was published in 2004. The next activity that we will do is watching a video that explores how those experiences can directly impact parenting. I want to emphasize that these responses are common and also vary. I'd like to take a moment now to turn it over to Rebecca to take us through the next few slides.
Thank you, Teresa. At this time, we're going to play a video for you all. It's called Source of the Wound. It's about 6 minutes and 21 seconds. As mentioned earlier, historical trauma is the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma. We will now be watching a video that relates to these concepts. And we just want to highlight here that this video does have content symbolized by the little light bulb that you see on the slide. And when you see this icon, just know that this video may bring up strong emotions. And in this video, we also want to mention that it includes stories of removal to boarding school, far away, running away, abuse, and death. But this video also ends in a positive way. However, please lean into self-care as needed. Before the video begins, please turn to page A10 of your workbooks to write down your thoughts about the following question. How could boarding school experiences impact parenting then and now? And so you'll have some time to jot down those thoughts or questions you may have in that section in your workbook. Does anybody have any questions before we begin? Great. We'll play the video now.
Historical trauma is defined as a collective and cumulative wounding across generations that results from massive catastrophic events targeting a community. So historically traumatic events would be forced removal, relocation, boarding schools, slavery. There's almost uncountable massacres in the United States against Indian people, and that doesn't even begin to count what happened across the border, across the many borders. There's a whole body of science now that's beginning to show that the experiences of our environments actually become embodied. They can impact the genetic material surrounding our DNA. So the trauma is held personally as well as collectively, and it can be passed on through the generations.
I remember the day that I was taken to Greyhound in Crown Point, New Mexico. I was 12 years old. Whole line of buses were in line when we went to the trading post, and that's where they put us in a bus and didn't tell us where we were going. I was crying, my mother was crying, my dad was angry, and I know that my mom had the roughest time with that. A lot of people that were there bringing their children were upset, and I was scared, confused. All of us were, and they took us. To this day, I remember my mom standing there crying. And we end up in a place called Intermountain, and that was in Utah. We were told that the way you live and the way you believe is not acceptable by us. We need to cut your hair. You cannot speak Navajo anymore. You're going to learn how to speak English. I had long hair, and it got cut. The sadness that I felt, it was painful. I couldn't sleep. I was scared that something would happen while I'm asleep. I felt like I lost everything in terms of my family, my relatives, and I was in the middle of this place where even if I was to run away, I didn't know which way to go. I remember some people hanging themselves in the dormitory and things like that. Some kids ran away and didn't make it home. A lot of people got sick. I remember a few times that I was in trouble only because I opened my mouth to say something in Navajo. But you know, that did not affect me physically, but it affected me emotionally because I began to think, like, what's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me. But no matter what they said to me, I knew who I was. The teaching from my dad was very strong to the point where I think that kept me going all these years. At some point, you have to make up your mind that you're going to be in pain the rest of your life, and you got to search around, how do I get rid of it? There's ways to do that, and a lot has to do with the spirituality. You'll never forget what happened, but you'll be in charge of that healing.
We actually have our own mechanisms to interrupt that intergenerational transmission of trauma in a way that gets at the source of the wound. Narrative is one of the ways that we interrupt that direct line of the trauma to the outcome. And story for Indigenous people is in our way of being. So we dance, we pray, and we speak, and we tell our stories. And we create things new. We define what being Indigenous is now. Who we are is completely up to us.
All right, everyone, let's come back together again. I just want to remind everyone of the prompt. How could boarding school experiences impact parenting then and now? And let's go around and just share a few examples or thoughts that you might have jotted down. Do I have a volunteer? Hardy.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, and this is such a powerful video. What I jot down, or what I've observed too from my relatives, are that our grandparents, when they went to boarding school, they were allowed to use the native language. So then the language kind of get lost over time, and now it becomes even harder then for us as the grandchildren to be able to speak it and even learn it, because a lot of the language got lost over time. So yeah, this concept of historical trauma is it really describes a lot of things for me.
Thank you for sharing that personal experience, Hardy. That's a really great example. Anyone else? Suzanne.
I had an elbow partner sharing with me. We were talking after the video, we were taking our notes, and we were just talking about how, earlier in our training, we were talking about belonging and how not being able to go home and be a part of community activities and ceremonies, how much that can impact that sense of belonging from both directions. Someone at boarding school not feeling belonging, but also the people in the community not being able to demonstrate belonging as well.
Yes, thank you for that example. As people are sharing, I see a lot of head nods, and we have even direct experience, or sometimes we have relatives that have shared their experiences, and These are just all really important examples to just acknowledge and to also reflect and think about. So thank you all for sharing. We're going to move into the next slide here. And this one, we're going to cover Native resilience. And I invite you all to turn to page A10 in your workbook. I want to ask you all, what are some of the key messages of resilience at the end of the video? As we discuss this question, please feel free to write down your ideas and others' ideas that you heard throughout the discussions in your workbook on the top half of this page on A10. So I want to give you a moment to do that, and we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, so we're going to come together around the question of what are some key messages of resilience that you saw at the end of the video. And I just want to ask for one example, if somebody could share what you wrote down or thought about. Hardy.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, so one of the things that was, just continuing from the answer before, right, like language, even if, it was banned during the school, we still use it to this day. So I think that's like a really good example of, or our, cultural resilience there, as well as, like eating the food that we're still eating and still having all of our, community activities and ceremonies and such. Thank you.
That's great. Those are great examples that you're seeing in the present day. What are some other examples or other ways that your families, communities, maybe the tribe or nation or pueblo that you're from that have demonstrated Native resilience? Can I get an example from somebody? Suzanne.
We were chatting at our table about how even though maybe environments have changed or foods that we have access to have changed over time, that culture and tradition remains, but that bringing in the what we have available in our communities was an example that was given of just continuing on, but also really acknowledging the resources that are available present day.
Great. That's another good example. And I think what we're seeing is that we observe resilience over time, and then we're also seeing resilience happening in the present day. And all of that is important. That is great. Thank you all for sharing. We're going to move on into the next video. And so if we can go to the next slide. This video is highlighting Native resilience, and it's about 5 minutes and 36 seconds. And I invite you all to turn to now page A10 in your workbook. And in this video, you're going to be listening to an audio vignette about Native resilience. This vignette is from Norman from the Pueblo of Zuni. So you're going to hear his voice throughout the video. And I want to ask you all to turn to the bottom half of page A10 in your workbooks and write down the answers to these two questions. The first one is, what challenges were shared that you heard in the video? And two, what examples of resilience were shared? Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we start? No. All right, we're going to play the video now.
Well, I guess if we go with the Western definition of resilience, I mean, it means basically to have the capacity and the ability to return back to normalcy after some difficult situation. I kind of see it as a tree on top of a mesa, sort of bending as the wind's blowing. and as soon as the wind dies, it sort of returns back to its normal stance. I think there's a fallacy in that definition because there's really no way to go back to normalcy. What is normal? And I think I say that in the sense of what we've experienced here with the recent pandemic. It has made us resilient, and I guess the way that I would describe it is that there's a difference in the way that Western people see resilience, which is the definition that I sort of gave. You know, they bounce back and they act like nothing happened, and then they continued their journey. For us, I think you have to look back at history of what our people, the indigenous people, endured. Whether it's from the colonial people or whether it's from the Spanish people or other people who came and tried to eradicate us, if not to try to assimilate. And of course, there's always the relocation portion, you know, that a lot of us Pueblos endured. And so when we look at that history, it's just there's been changes that and challenges that have come within our ancestors, but they've learned to adapt. They've learned to take on that challenge and using whether the ancestral history, knowing the stories, because it's not the first time our ancestors have faced challenges. When you look at this mountain behind me, that's part of our sacred Toayelini Mountain, Corn Mountain, and how we survived basically two big events. One was the Great Flood that, you know, all the Pueblo communities have. But the other one was the invasion of the conquistadors and how our families took refuge on this mountain. And so that is in a way an example where experience has infused in our ancestors how to be resilient, how to adapt. How did they learn to live up there for that long period of time? How did they learn to survive when the floods were close to, you know, the tops of these mesas? And it's those that they've passed on generations to generations, not only visually by looking at this mountain, but also orally, that they've given generations to generations, to say that there's really no challenge that we haven't encountered, that we, if we reflect back, are able to face the challenges now. We've had a lot of illnesses approach a lot of our communities. Back then, without modern medicine, it was the cultural teachings, the reliance on traditional practitioners, healers, and traditional medicines and ceremonies that, yes, there were some people that succumbed to their end of their life's journey, but there's a great multitude that were saved and they move forward. And it's that experience that they have shared within families, in generations. So in a way that has let us know that resiliency has always been part of Indigenous people. But I think one thing we have to realize is that resiliency doesn't come individualistically, it comes communally, meaning not only within your family, but within the collective community. Our Zuni Pueblo had 6 villages. When, you know, Coronado came, and after all the wars, it collapsed into one big main village. And that collective union of the 6 pueblos made it that we were able to resist a lot of challenges during those days. And so that sort of lends to the idea of the collective survival, the collective resilience that has been built within our people.
Okay, everyone, we're going to come back together again. The two questions that we were reflecting on during the video is one, what challenges were shared and what examples of resilience were shared? So can I get a volunteer to share a thought about the first question? Hardy.
Thank you. So one thing that I heard Norm said is, and I'm kind of reflecting back, which is pretty accurate in terms of there's this Western kind of viewpoint about resilience, that it's about going back to how things were, almost like going back to how things were before something bad happened. But that's not necessarily always can be possible, right? Like it's more like for us in our communities learning how to live and thrive basically with the new normal. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, resilience is sometimes a little bit more complicated, right? And we heard some really good examples from Norman about his views on resilience. And yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you for sharing. Can I get a volunteer to share what they thought about the second question? Suzanne.
I really appreciated the example, kind of building on what Hardy said about how that resilience isn't something that just is a part of Indigenous communities and ways of being when things are hard, that it's always been a part of ways of being, and gave the example of not just COVID, but also during floods and just in general as things are changing, that communities are always resilient and that it's a part of the ways of being. And so that's just a really beautiful way to think about that. It's not just about facing hard times, that that's a part of how it's always been, is being resilient.
Thank you. That's another great example. And right, we heard Norman speak about how in history there's been examples of resilience, but also that it includes community, not necessarily just individual resilience, but communal resilience. So yes, thank you for highlighting that for us. We're going to continue to come back to this theme of historical resilience in Module C, as well as throughout the training session. So you're going to see this theme come up from time to time. So the next slide that we're going to look at here, you're going to see a quote, and I'm going to actually ask somebody to volunteer to read it. Would anybody like to read the quote from the slide? Great, Hardy, go ahead.
They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds.
Right. So I want to ask everybody at this time to just take a moment to think about, what your thoughts are about this question. And there's a area in your workbook on page A11 that you can write down any thoughts. And just take a moment to either think on your own or with an elbow partner about this quote. And we're going to come back and share a few thoughts. Okay, everyone. Can I get a volunteer to, if somebody can share what they jotted down or what they were thinking about? Hardy.
So me and my elbow partner were discussing how powerful, not just the quote, but the image of, I think it's like a bean sprout that we see here in the slide. It's like, things, bad and good things are happening, but focusing on kind of like the bad things that happen to us, we're still alive, even if we're buried, and we're growing every day, and surviving and thriving. And I think that's a great, I guess, to connect to the previous section about resilience, I think that's a great image about resilience.
Thank you for sharing, Hardy. Yeah, I mean, when we read this quote, when we see the image, sometimes it can invoke thoughts that, we were, as Native people, were trying to be erased, but the seeds of resistance and resilience remained in us as a people, and that our roots and spirits continue to go stronger, like you said, Hardy, thriving today, despite all those attempts to destroy us. So thank you so much for sharing that. So that concludes Module A, but we're going to go into a few reminders now. If we can click to the next slide. We're going to take a moment to reflect on the things that we heard, learned, and talked about. Invite you all to turn to page A12 in your workbook. And I just want to take this moment also to thank you all for your participation throughout this training, and that there is one final activity before we review homework, and then we'll close in a good way. This session and future sessions can bring up emotions or can feel heavy to discuss for some. And, just a reminder to take care of yourself. We'll be identifying resources and activities for self-care at the end. And that we also talked about taking care of ourselves throughout the training in this room. So please take some time to do that. And we're going to discuss what self-care could look like after this training as well, and outside of this space. We'll spend a little bit more time also developing self-care plans in Module D. And so I want to ask you all to open your workbooks to page 12. And at the bottom half of the page, write down any responses to the following. If I need support, a person I can reach out or talk to is an activity I can do for self-care, and or a resource I can use if I need support or help. So just take a moment to think about those prompts and write any ideas or questions that you have. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide. And this is going to be our closing slide for today. Go ahead and turn to page A12 in your workbook. And we're just going to highlight a few things here and review homework that's on that same page. And on the top of the page, I want to invite you all to write down one way I will practice resilience this week. We ended this module on resilience, and so we want to continue those thoughts. And also, I want to invite anyone from the group that if there are any resources or community services that you would like to share, we're going to share a listing with everyone before they go home about just community resources that you can use that is related to the topics in the sessions. We also want to remind everyone that there is an exit ticket, and we're going to be handing those out and also collecting them before you leave. Please just focus on the prompts there on the exit ticket. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask myself or Teresa. And just want to highlight again that there is a prompt there about your overall reaction to the class and why. There's going to be a space to rank your reaction as an emoji. Smile means a good experience, no emotion is unsure, and the sad face is not a good experience. Also, there's some prompts there around something new that I learned today, something I want to learn more about. Maybe there's a question you still have about today's session. There's also space for any ideas or feedback that we can incorporate into future sessions. And the last question on the card asks if there's any follow-up that's needed. And please indicate what kind of support that may be on the back of your exit ticket. So that concludes Module A. I want to thank you all for your time, and thank you so much for all of the really great responses, all the reflection that happened, and also any personal experiences that were shared throughout this module. And Teresa and I are going to hang out afterwards. So if you have any questions still, or if you would like to talk to us individually, we're here to support you all as well. And thank you all again, and you all have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.